Well, in the year 2000, I think I'll probably be the spaceship to the moon dictating robots, two robots, or I may be at the funeral of a computer.
In 2001, A Space Odyssey, Stanley Kubrick took us places NASA never goes. That's why it's one of our favorite movies. Hard to believe it's only 5 years away.
When watching sci-fi films, I often find myself asking the question, why do they all look like that? I mean, well, obviously it's the future and minimalism in space, but it feels like more than that. That feels like a vague and reductive synopsis of what it really is. And it's not minimalism, it's modernism. That's a good place to start, because those terms are sisters, not twins.
This series, The Shock of the New, is about an old subject, almost 100 years old. The art of our own century, modernism.
Sisters, not twins. Modernism, minimalism, and space. Let's define some terms. Modernism is an art movement that began around 1890, and TLDR, society was tired of the status quo not serving them, so they abandoned it, in search of something that explored functionality over form. Something that embraced the use of new materials like concrete, glass, some metals, plastics. Something that rejected the traditions of the past. Something modern. Architecturally speaking, modernism is characterized by large open spaces, clean lines, a lack of unnecessary decorative elements, open floor plans, and minimalism. Minimalism is a characteristic of modernism that focuses on reducing unnecessary elements in a space, as well as decorative elements. Does a pillar need to be pretty to function as a support? Probably not. This takes us to space as a function of design. I feel as though space is a blank canvas, one that lacks any sense of inherent humanity. Space historically was an unreachable destination, a topic people would posture about visiting in a distant future, until it wasn't.
Quality base here. The Eagle has landed.
This changed the game, so to speak.
I don't think there is going to be atomic warfare, but I think that there is going to be all this automation. People are going to be out of work and a great population. And I think something has to be done about it.
Chapter 2. Modernism in movies, and by movies I specifically mean 2 sci-fi films. So, one thing about me, I really love Kubrick films. I know. 2001: Space Odyssey is a film that attempts to examine the existential threat presented to humanity by our own evolution, technologically and biologically speaking. The film's production design is so clearly modernist. In a building without gravity, how does one get around? The modernist solution? Simulate gravity. The spaceship, the Discovery 1, rotates like a centrifuge to create its own artificial gravity. Screens litter the ship, constantly blinking with stats and renders of ship parts. But all of these elements enforce their function within the space. Nothing is unnecessary. HAL 9000, the AI companion, makes no attempt to disguise his artificiality. A rectangle and red dot. The interior of the ship itself is simple and spacious, but modular, which further emphasizes modernism's focus on efficiency and practicality. This ship is like a Modernism 101 class. 2001: A Space Odyssey became visually iconic in terms of sci-fi filmmaking, establishing what the future looked like in film. Director Andrei Tarkovsky has admitted that he hated Kubrick's space opera. Quote, 2001: A Space Odyssey is phony on many points, even for specialists. For a true work of art, the fake must be eliminated. Solaris is a response to the clean, clinical vision of 2001: A Space Odyssey. While 2001 explores humanity's evolution through technology, Solaris focuses on identity, human understanding, and the nature of reality, all within a decaying space station orbiting a mysterious planet. This planet creates simulacras, unsatisfying imitations of memories in this case, which challenges the idea of scientific objectivity and delves into the emotional and psychological impact of encountering the unknown. Tarkovsky was inspired by many of the modernist design tropes that Kubrick used in 2001: A Space Odyssey, most evident with the use of geometric, functional, and minimalist spaces. However, in Solaris, these spaces are intentionally disrupted. The rooms aboard the spacecraft are littered with a distinctly human mess. Bedsheets, papers, notes, disrupting the minimalist environment that's emblematic of space in cinema as established by Kubrick. The most striking contrast is the ornate rec room? Lounge? I'm not sure. It feels incredibly out of place in an otherwise utilitarian ship, but I believe it symbolizes a rejection of the modern in favor of something comforting and familiar. This is traditionalism in this case. It's meant to ground us to something emblematic of humanity. Chapter 3. Why Modernism? Beautifully organized delusions. Knowing what we know now about modernism and sci-fi cinema of the late 60s and early 70s still remains the question of why? Why do all of the ships look like that? Why do filmmakers choose to use modernism as their aesthetic? This brings us to culture, as it very often does. Culturally, modernist architecture became associated with ideals of progress, rationality, and the idea that good design should be accessible to all. The aforementioned focus on clean lines and lack of ornamentation reflected a belief in transparency. These design elements parallel the era's desire to overcome past stressors, like the recent wars and economic strife. Modernist architecture also saw a ton of backlash. Its coldness and lack of human scale were seen as alienating by some, as expressed rather eloquently, derisively, in this clip from BBC's Shock of the New.
This is the scariest new monument that I know, Albany Mall, the seat of government of New York State. It was designed for one purpose and it does it very well. It expresses the centralization of power. And I don't imagine there's a single citizen who's ever wandered on this plaza and felt the slightest connection with the bureaucrats who live in their towers up there. The place would make Albert Speer seem delicate. Utter simplicity of meaning, no ambiguities. And what comes out is not the difference between America and Russia, but the similarities between the corporate and the bureaucratic states of mind. Any one of those buildings there you can imagine with an eagle on top, or a swastika, or a hammer and sickle. It makes very little difference to the buildings. If you forget about the projects and the manifestos and think about what it actually built, there's no doubt that our culture has its language of political power. It's not linked to any particular ideology. It's value-free. It can mean anything. In the area of public building, our century has not yet managed to come up with an architecture of free will.
Modernism's impersonality was seen as a turn-off. Plain white everything, no kitschy clutter, bland concrete and glass exteriors. I could go on. This circles us back to Space Odyssey and Solaris, and something that unites and repels the two further: the past. Chapter 4. What Came Before? Modernism's uneasy acknowledgement of the past. In both films exists a segment where we are shown the past. In 2001: Space Odyssey, this is the opening of the film, The Monkeys and the Monolith. The monolith reflects modernist architecture's attempt to assimilate in with the natural environment upon which it is built. In Solaris, this past segment makes up the majority of the first half of the film. Modernist architectural motifs are then injected into the plot by the introduction of space travel. Modernism is not really relevant until Chris Kelvin is actively going to assess the well-being of non-responsive crewmates orbiting Solaris. Chapter 5. Conclusion. In conclusion, modernism is the look of the future in sci-fi films. In both films, modernism symbolizes the tension between humanity's desire for order and the existential challenges of living in a modern technological world. The use of the past in these films helped to reinforce their core distinct differences in ideology and perspectives on modernism. In 2001: A Space Odyssey, modernist architecture and design elements emphasize the power of technology to shape history. In Solaris, the disruption of modernism reflects the emotional and psychological toll of technological progress. Ultimately, 2001: A Space Odyssey and Solaris both use modernism not just to define their worlds, but to unmask the complex, often frightening relationship between humanity and the future.